Guys, if you don't know who this is, then you are sorely out of the loop, and have been for a while. This here is a legend, a YouTube legend, Hank Green. Good. Where do I even start about this guy? Many of you might remember him from SciShow or Crash Course. You might know him as the co-founder of VidCon, and just all around great guy who's been doing content on his own channel. I mean, he's done guest speaking event things on the Discovery YouTube channel and on PBS Eons and just the PBS YouTube channels. He is... Your teachers have probably shown you his videos in class. I get to see his videos in English class? Based. He is a genuine legend within the YouTube sphere as like just a reasonable, likable, smart, edutainment YouTuber. And not only has he sparked an interest in learning from me, but from countless other people. And so when he makes a video about a topic related to politics, I lock the fuck in. Because this guy knows what he's talking about. And he's good at talking about it. Now here I've got a video that he's made, and I've been recommended, that the topic immediately appealed to me, just right out the gate. Populism, media revolutions, and our terrible moment. I'm guessing this video is about the state of misinformation and mistruth that we are in right now due to the internet, and I cannot think of a better person to talk about this than him, because it truly... I have argued for a few years now that the internet may truly be what destroys our civilization, like just destroys humanity. Like, it allows people to decide what is the truth so subjectively to the point where not enough people are together on the idea that we ought to preserve ourselves anymore. Like, it just ends humanity because, like, misinfo and mistruths just become the norm. I'm curious to see if Hank thinks it'll go that far or what the deal is. I have not seen this video yet, obviously, but I've been recommended it, so let's go check this shit out. Hit me up, Hank Green. What do you got to say?
John, in this video, I would like to try to explain what the hell is going on, which, I know, is a tall order and is going to be imprecise, but we're going to do our best. Everyone lives through unprecedented times, but a thing I keep thinking, especially when I'm looking down at an 8-year-old boy who's probably going to be alive in the year 2100.
That is a good way of putting it. Everyone lives through unprecedented times. That's not wrong. Everyone says, why do I keep living through historical events? But we kind of, like, no matter what, you always are. You know, we always have, we always will. Yo, Tara Thompson, thank you so much for the tier 2 sub over on YouTube. I really appreciate it. That's so kind of you. You didn't say anything, but you're based in Pog, and I really appreciate you. Thank you.
100 is how weird is this really? How weird is his life going to be? And John, I'd like to make the case that very. Like, his life is going to be historically weird. My son is going to grow up in a world that has been fractured by a set of circumstances that the world has not seen for more than 500 years. Now, media technologies absolutely do evolve and change, and there are new ones all the time, but I'd like to start, if you will forgive me, talking a little bit about radio, which I think we think of radio as one of the most boring communications technologies there is, just a way to get music that we didn't pick, interspersed by ads that are at least locally relevant. So let's put ourselves into the minds of people back in the early 1900s. It's hard to over-exaggerate how powerful radio was when it first hit, which was not 500 years ago. We're going to get there. We're starting with radio. Radio was invented in the 1890s, but it wasn't until the 1920s that lots of people started having radios.
I think it's key that we keep in mind that radio's conception, well, it was definitely a big deal in regards to, like, opening the American people, or just people in general, not just America, but people across the world up to, like, communication in a way that was never possible before. There was usually, like, regulation. Sure, anyone could, like, I think buy the ability or a license to broadcast, I think, but, like, it could be revoked. You could do things that would get you taken off the waves, right? Like, wasn't that always a thing? So I feel like there was a standard that had to be met, you know? Like, there was always your War of the Worlds type deal where people were falling for bullshit and killing themselves, believing the world was ending. But I feel like overall, there was a higher standard of truth, even in the early radio, than what we see nowadays on the internet, where millions, I should say, more accurately, tens or even hundreds of millions of people get their news exclusively from fully unaccountable media figures on the internet. And when I say unaccountable, I need you to think about this. These right-wing figures are genuinely unaccountable. They can lie and shit talk and like scam as much as they want, and unless they break the law, there's no one there to hold them to account. Joe Rogan, even like hell, Spotify did like what was called the Great N-word Purge among Joe Rogan fans, where because they did that big exclusive deal, Spotify had to send editors back into all like thousands of episodes of Joe Rogan going back years, or a decade plus, to remove all the instances where Joe Rogan says the N-word, because it wouldn't vibe well with the advertisers. And of course, obviously, Spotify knew of all this. They knew what kind of creator he is. They paid for it anyway because he's so popular. And so these platforms are willing to cover for the bad behavior of people that make them a lot of money in the tech world. And there's just no accountability. And I don't think that's comparable to really any other time in history. Like this crossover of zero accountability and ultimate reachability of as many people as possible. Like it's an insane intersection of circumstance.
In their homes, and by the 1930s, they were cheap and easy to get. And I need you to imagine for a moment how extremely weird this technology must have been. For most people, the radio was the first time in their lives that they heard music without the musician being physically near to them. That was the world less than 100 years ago. But more relevant here, it was the first time that one person's voice could reach millions of people, and it could do that in real time. In fact, at first, it could only do that in real time. This was all happening at the same time as the Great Depression. People had good reasons to be pretty dissatisfied with their situations, and this wasn't just an American thing. Europe was also struggling, especially Germany, which
I'm going to guess there was a rise of populism over the radio, right? Great Depression, massive form of communication. I'm going to guess a bunch of populist dipshits started radicalizing people to the right over the radio. That's my guess.
been hit hard by having...
That's the state of radio now, obviously. Like, talk radio right now is hard right-wing. That's like grounds we lost decades ago. Before I was born, we lost that arena.
To pay reparations to the winners of World War I, though how much that contributed to things is apparently debated by historians, of which I am not one. People were not in great places. There was demand for, people wanted things to blame their circumstances on. And for a few reasons, radio was much better at satisfying that demand than newspapers. Newspapers had been around for a long time. They were more expensive. You had to pay for them every time you wanted a new one. There was also more regulation and structure around them. People had built up an understanding that newspapers were sometimes trying to manipulate them, so they had some built-in wariness. Radio, on the other hand, was brand new. It was a one-time investment. You didn't need to be literate, which many people weren't. You didn't need to go into this city to buy a new one every day. And more than anything, it was magical. Like, I have a hard time imagining how new and weird and wonderful it must have been to listen to a charismatic person talk to me from 1,000 miles away, and what a spell that must have cast. And also to know that people all over my country...
For real, though, imagine you are one of the first people ever to have that, to hear that. Like, you're just out, you got your new radio from the store, you hook it up, you turn up the volume and you open your windows so you can hear it while you're doing your daily work outside, and you're listening to a guy tell you the news about the world through magic waves in the air in your countryside little shanty while you get your can you fucking imagine how crazy that was for the first people to receive it, especially in rural areas who really didn't see or hear from people a lot and didn't know much about the outside world, just to get radio as a regularly, thing that they can just tune in. Man. Just generally, Wi-Fi, radio signals, and TV signals, that shit is if it's not something you are used to because you grew up with it, it must feel like magic. If it was something developed in your lifetime.
Country, we're hearing the same speech at the same time, and we're all there together experiencing it, millions of us. There were also in the beginning very few legal regulations on radio, and I think just as powerfully, if not more powerfully, there were no mental regulations. There were no norms. People's minds were just open to this, to have a person speaking to them. You might go and watch a talk.
I'd still argue it was nowhere near as influential, wide-reaching, or Wild West-ish as, ironically, as the internet is. That's the thing. This is so different, the times we're in now. I get the point he's making, but I just want to emphasize, the times we're in now are so much worse. The situation is arguably... I hope that people's brains can be healed. It's possible they can't be. It's possible that the average person has fallen in terms of, adherence to reality and truth.
Or a debate or something, but otherwise the only people talked to were their friends. And this was a new way that strangers, powerful, charismatic strangers, could speak to you. For example, Father Coughlin, who was one of the first radio preachers, and he tapped into specifically this dissatisfaction. He connected with and empathized with normal, everyday, ordinary Americans. He spoke about elitist power structures, the banks, the inequality, and not all, but certainly some of the Jews. Atheistic Jews, communist Jews, millions of people.
He was a full-on Nazi. He was like one of the first big figures to push Nazism to the American people.
Listened to these broadcasts. He was an extraordinarily powerful figure in the US, and as Hitler rose to power in Germany, in part because he was also super savvy at using the radio to communicate with the common people of Germany, Father Coughlin spoke about him with great appreciation and interest. I'm simplifying a ton here, but there's something happening here. It is a post-media revolution rise in populism, and it happens.
Do you think it's possible that, like, as long as there are, like, bad people with narcissistic tendencies in our society, if there are ways and avenues to gain a lot of attention, they will be driven to do so at all costs. And to gain personal success and fulfillment, they will do anything. And those people, due to, like, their unmatchable drive and will, may always shine the brightest in any industry where reaching a large amount of people is necessary. Like Andrew Tate's will always be the most popular. Logan Paul's will always be the most popular because narcissistic, soulless people like that who are willing to throw anyone under the bus to succeed will always reach the top in a landscape like this. So radio, printing press, TV, and of course the internet, the worst of the worst always rise to the top. Fox News, Father Coughlin, or whatever his name was, Alex Jones and Andrew Tate and Jake Paul, like just the worst of the worst. When you give people the ability to reach millions, the worst of the worst rise to the top. Almost every time, it seems. And it's getting worse with the more people that one can reach. And with the internet, now it's at like a critical mass.
Pretty much every time there's a media revolution. But populism begins not as the ideology, but the market. I'm seeing people get this wrong all over the place right now. Populism is...
If in the next 2 to 4 years we can destroy populism in America, I think democracy has a chance. Populism is cancer and it needs to be like heavily radiated and chemotherapied in the coming years. That shit needs to die. Like fuck populism. It's how Trump won. No chance. I need it to go. I need it to go. I really do. I might just do a whole segment called like Populism is Cancer, where I just rant about like popular populist ideas and how far from reality they are, but how overwhelmingly like believable they are, and how many people already believe them, and how the right weaponizes those ideas to gain supporters.
Not an ideology, it's a marketing strategy. I see your real human problems, and I also see who...
Real. It is a fucking marketing strategy. Thank you. It is not an ideology. It is a method that ideologues use to propagandize to the people.
Who is causing them? All of the institutions that are impenetrable and imperfect, but also the people those institutions are secretly supporting at your expense or controlled by to your detriment. And if you listen to me, we will solve all the problems with a number of new policies. But sometimes populism actually becomes the policy. It goes from being the message to being what we're going to do. Here are the bad guys. The policy is get rid of the bad guys. That's what happened with Father Coughlin. It's what happened with Nazi Germany. Father Coughlin actually started to advocate for the US to work with Nazi Germany. He was an extremely harsh critic of FDR. He began to say very Nazi-like things about what Americans should do to Jews. But as the tensions between the US and Germany rose, that became untenable, and the public and the government persuaded radio stations to stop carrying his broadcasts. Even though Coughlin remained popular, FDR basically said, no, this guy cannot talk to the American people anymore. This isn't print, it's radio.
He got canceled.
It's new, it's a limited public resource,
Literally.
It's a spectrum that we can't fit everything on, and this is one of the things we can't fit on it. And I think this was a fairly clear violation of the freedom of speech. Father Coughlin drifted into obscurity. He became a normal priest again. He died the year before.
Once again, I just don't believe freedom of speech as a, like, idea on its own is a good thing. Like, I think you have to make an argument for why freedom of speech is good for certain ideas. I think that the onus should be on some people for that, because good lord, this idea that, like, I don't care if this guy has rallied thousands to, like, murder people in the street with his rhetoric. He didn't directly tell them to do it. You can't take his show down. That's against his free speech. It's like, No, you know what? I don't. I think it's okay if we go against that guy's free speech, actually. Seriously, make an argument for why it's bad. That's not slippery slope. Make an argument for why that is bad.
Before I was born. So people are thinking probably right now, okay, so Trump is like the Coughlin of the internet age, or like the Hitler of the internet age. And like a little bit, like you can see it in there, like the alignment with people's legitimate grievances, the railing against every institution from public schools to doctors, the use of a new, somewhat magical,
The comparison is 100 billion% apt. Let's not even pretend it's not.
Regulated communications technology to name those threats and label who is responsible for them as the enemy. Trump is the product of a post-media revolution rise in populism. I don't think anyone would argue with that. That does not mean that he is the same guy as Coughlin or Hitler. But it is interesting that he is a product of a phenomenon that we have seen before. But also, he's not like these other guys in another way, because I don't think that radio is the best analogy for the internet. Radio and TV are centralizing, whereas the internet is decentralized. What do I mean?
Yes.
Well, to make a radio station, you need
when I say that the internet is like the Wild West, this is what I mean. The internet is decentralized. It is basically just a network where billions of different things exist. And yeah, the decentralization is a massive aspect of what makes this so different. Reddit is relative. Yeah, I mean, obviously Reddit and YouTube being completely different, like, platforms that are completely under different control of different people and everything. Like, that's a good example. Obviously, there's always been different networks in the case of TV and even, like, broadcast stations when it comes to radio. But none of those have ever really allowed you to engage in the same way. You could call in, but that's not the same as posting on a subreddit or just making your own subreddit. Right?
Need advanced technology, lots of money, you need permission. It's very easy to regulate because there are only so many radio frequencies, and governments actually had to quite quickly move in and regulate who would have access to them, or stations would constantly be overlapping with each other, or the most powerful, wealthiest person could just take up the whole radio spectrum. Television has been the same. There were only so many channels, each tightly regulated. They're very expensive to run, and at the beginning, there was only space for 3 or 4 of them. This media revolution, because it was so centralizing, was a force that actually ended up being quite useful for bringing America and other countries together, reducing the number of voices that could be heard.
Ironically, yeah, the internet becoming more centralized, which it is actually becoming the problem, because using the decentralized era of the internet, the right gained a lot of cultural power and literal power through the election, for example, and now they're trying to lock it all down. So that now that the need for a Wild West internet is gone, they want it to be fully centralized and controlled, and by them. So that Wild West is going away primarily because of the desires of the right. They don't need the internet to be Wild West free speech anymore. Those days are over. You're not going to see those people arguing for that anymore, even in the coming years, because that's not what they stand for, and it's not what their guy is going to be doing.
Thus silencing many marginal perspectives. But eventually TV did start to fracture until we got multiple news channels from different perspectives. First, Fox News with its more right-wing nationalist perspectives, then MSNBC with a more progressive left-wing perspective. But even then, TV was a relatively centralizing force.
I think MSNBC just got bought out by a conservative, by the way. Their like viewership and subscriptions have dropped by over 80% in like I think it was a week after. So MSNBC is probably cooked now. But yeah, we are seeing a massive, probably we're going to see a big die-off of like all the biggest progressive media outlets in the mainstream, as I'm pretty certain going forward, the only relevant progressive outlets of news are going to be independent and online going forward. Like all the TV outlets shifted right. Some of the online ones like TYT shifted right. If you're progressive, you're probably going to gravitate towards internet figures. And maybe that's what's needed for the left to genuinely counter the right in today's culture.
Because so much of it was available, and there were lots of rules and regulations that had built up over the years. The internet isn't like this. It is the opposite of this. But there has been another media revolution very much like this. The first one, the printing press. The movable type printing press, at least the version used in Europe, was invented by a guy named Johannes Gutenberg to solve the problem of every book in Europe being written by hand, which does seem like a difficult way to do things. For a long time after Gutenberg started making Bibles, no one really knew what to do with print technologies. Books were big and expensive, and there just wasn't that much demand for them. That demand was mostly soaked up by the most powerful institutions out there, which is largely the Catholic Church, the only church of note in Europe. But then a guy had an idea He, like lots of other people, did not like how the dominant system was operating, and there had been many arguments about that over the years. But instead of just talking about it, he went to a printer, and he said, hey, print me 105-page pamphlets. And that was way easier for the printer than making a whole book. It was cheap. The printing press was already there. All they needed was the paper and the ink. This guy's name was Martin Luther, and you might know him from one of the things he made, Lutheranism. People could pay just a little bit for a pamphlet like that, and you'd actually make quite a lot of money as a printer doing it. You could create an economy around that. Printers, in their off time, could just print up a bunch of Martin Luther's pamphlets and sell them themselves. Martin Luther...
Once again, though, not quite comparable to the hellscape of the internet, where the worst rise to the top. But yeah, to be fair, during the era of the printing press, there was a lot of, like, psychos who took advantage of it. Like, I remember there was this one religious fanatic guy who would jump from, like, religious commune to religious commune. There was, like, a Sam O'Nella video about it or something that I watched. This is a long time ago, so I'm pulling from a deep-cut memory here. But he was this, like, really deranged dude who wanted a polycule of wives, and he was, like, I think a Giga Mormon, too. But he would jump between, like, religious commune institutions trying to get, like, collect wives, and he would print out these pamphlets claiming that he's, like, godly or something. I don't remember his name, but dude was deranged. And there's definitely been individuals like that who've used, you know, the printing press even to gain some level of notoriety and prominence.
Luther, interestingly, just like everyone on Twitter, didn't actually make any money selling these pamphlets. It was the people with the presses who got paid, and Luther was just doing it because he wanted to get his message out. Familiar. And again, I have to try and get in touch with how weird this must have felt to the people at the time. Books were big and expensive, and for hundreds of years, the ideas of a normal person owning one would have been ludicrous. And so almost all of the people who were printing anything were really big, powerful institutions. But now, there was this thing that was like a book, and it had ideas. Ideas that weren't the ideas of the powerful people who controlled the books. They were new ideas from a guy who wasn't particularly powerful. And the powerful people really didn't like these ideas. And it seems that Martin Luther realized that the more inflammatory his writing got, the more people wanted to buy the pamphlets, and the more printers wanted to print them. And to be fair, the institutions of the time were not undeserving of critique. Now, Martin Luther was not the only person who printed pamphlets like these, but he was very good at it. I didn't really understand this for the first couple of decades after knowing that Martin Luther existed and that the Reformation was a thing, but this guy was a social media influencer, and he was also not chill. He was a reckless guy. You might not be super surprised to hear this, but he hated Jews. During a peasant rebellion, which was in part actually inspired by his work, he called on landowners to just kill.
I swear to God, anti-Semitism is like the oldest and most common form of bigotry globally. It's in every story of history that you can imagine, anti-Semitism plays a part in some way, shape, or form.
The peasants likening them to dogs that needed to be put down. Somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 of them were killed. He called the Pope the Antichrist. He was not a chill guy with the rhetoric, is all I'm saying, though it should be said several times, the Catholic Church in the 60s.
Misogyny is definitely pretty popular. I meant more towards, like, an other group. Right? Like, not necessarily, like, gender-based, but, like, oh, this group we've othered and we discriminate against them as, like, different. From our, like, whiteness or our being Roman or whatever. I don't know. Go back, like, literally thousands of years, and it's still a thing.
16th century was worse. Just absolutely very bad. I don't feel like I necessarily need to get into it, but pretty evil. And also, in addition to being inflammatory, Martin Luther was an exceptional theologian. His arguments were good. That's part of the reason why he was so popular back then, and indeed remains fairly popular now. And again, there were, at first, because it was also new, no regulations on this new form of media in law, and just as importantly, none in the minds of people. And there were regulations on calling the Pope the Antichrist, and Martin Luther was excommunicated, but he did manage to survive, which is amazing to me. Like, he lived. I would love someone to explain to me how he was not just killed. But when you, like, look at the...
That right there is where we're gonna end that off. Holy shit. I would love for someone to explain to me how he was not just killed. Dude, you know people in, like, 200 years are gonna ask that about, like, Andrew Tate, right? Like, how did someone not just kill him? You know? Like, we asked that about, like, Hitler and about, like, awful people in history. Like, how did someone not, like, but just know that in the future, people are going to ask that question of us, how one of us didn't just do that. Of, like, some awful person that's around today. It's inevitable. It will happen. People will wonder that. Many people did try with Hitler, though. Yeah, his own generals tried to kill him, famously, which is hilarious because Trump literally asked his top general at one point, or told his top general at one point, I should say, that he wants his generals to be just like Hitler's. And his top general tried to explain to him, no, Mr. Trump, Hitler's generals literally tried to kill him. You don't want that. And he was like, no, they didn't. They didn't do that. No. They were very loyal, very loyal. They loved him. They would do anything he said. He conquered nearly all of Europe with those generals. I want generals like that. I want those generals. I don't believe this fake news about them trying to kill Hitler. I want generals like that. Just get me generals like that. Just do what I asked. Do it. That's how I imagine it went.
No. Don't feed me the fake news. I don't want to hear about this fake history news about Hitler's generals trying to kill him. Just get me my generals. Just get...
I love your impression of Trump. I do my best, okay? I do my best. I'm working on it. It'll get good. We got 4 more years of, at least, of Trump and me listening to him speak for me to refine my impression. The more I hear him talk, the better it gets. It's already really good, Zan. People tell me it's awful from time to time, so I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on it, personally. But, listen, I highly recommend you guys go check out Hank Green. His content is amazing, but I'm going to end that bit there because I don't want to just yoink his entire video, and I want to encourage you guys to go watch it as well. Dude, Hank Green is awesome, and I think his takes here are pretty good, and I think it's important that we look at this, like, escalating issue that humanity has had as far back as we have been able to communicate. That as we give ourselves the power to reach a larger audience, the worst possible people take advantage of it, and they do harm with that power. And we're still here today to talk about the issue, and so presumably we'll come back from this, but it's really scary to see the problem get this much worse with the advent of the internet and internet, like, influencers and content creators and propagandists, and to think that we might be running out of time. Like, climate change is looming. It's here, actually. It's not looming, it's here. And a large amount of people have been convinced by populists that climate change is a Chinese conspiracy theory that they need to fight against any attempt to stop. Any attempt to stop climate change is an attack on you, is the messaging the right pushes to the American people. It's very different from the simple denial of the past. It's an outright aversion and a rallying to fight against the prevention of further damage by climate change. We're in a deep hole right now we got to climb ourselves out of before we can even talk about building to something new. It's a rough situation, but don't doomer. Don't doomer. We just have a lot of work to do. And if anything, that should be motivating. If that doesn't motivate you, then you're in the wrong mindset. You should work on that. Get into the right mindset. I'm doomering. Do not doomer, Grimwolf. You need to be motivated. You are cringe if you doomer, and you should feel ashamed of yourself if you doomer. Anyway, with all that said, if you enjoyed this segment, please consider leaving a like, subscribe, ring the bell icon, and comment if you want to see more from me and help the channel. All these things really do help a ton, forcing YouTube to push my content and the algorithm to a larger audience, so I really do appreciate it to all of you who do that. And of course, if you want to see more from me on other platforms, you can follow my social medias that are linked down below in the description, including joining my fan Discord, which is the main hub of my community and fan base if you don't want to miss anything like watch parties, call-in streams, and gaming events. And finally, if you want to support me directly, financially, and help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head, then consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or supporting me financially through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buying merch through the Streamlabs link down below if you want to get yourself some Xander merch, because that does exist, by the way. But with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.